it's 101, so I'm gonna get started. I'm expecting a few more people to join along the way, but that's just fine. They'll get caught up. So first off, welcome. I really appreciate you being here and cutting a little bit of your afternoon, or where I guess we have probably several time zones actually represented here to hear about project-based learning. We started this series of professional development kind of free webinars to help with teachers this year. I mean, we know everybody's kind of in different states in terms of the recovery plan, and a lot of people are looking at what's next. They're trying to figure out how can we do these things that maybe we've known were probably good, probably things that we could have been doing in the past, but this entire experience over the last 16 months has given a lot of educators and administrators a little bit of permission, let's say, to try something new, to shake it up. And project-based learning is where a lot of folks are landing. We've heard really good, I'm sure that you've heard really good things about it. Some of you may be practitioners currently of project-based learning. Others are just here to get started. But regardless, we've got something that I think will be helpful for everyone. One thing that would be good, I think, for me to do right off the bat is to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're gonna be talking about today. So I'm giving you a very short overview of our organization, BSD, which stands for Build Something Different. I'll talk about kind of what we bring to schools and where our perspective is coming from. And I think that'll help you to contextualize the rest of the information you get today. I'll tell you a little bit about my background, and then we'll jump into the good stuff. In terms of project-based learning, we are going to do a quick intro because some people that have joined on have indicated that they have not used project-based learning before, and this will be the first time. So we are going to do a little bit of a kind of definition of terms, so to speak, so we can hear, we can all be speaking the same language. And then we're going to jump right into designing a PBL experience. I've got an interactive exercise for us to try, and excited for us to, kind of get our minds working a little bit this afternoon. At that point, I would like to finish it up with a sample project. So I can just show you how we're achieving some project-based learning and finding success with our school partners, and give you a real world example that you can kind of touch and feel. And finally, we have some time for Q&A at the end. I've got a couple folks from our team to help out that are on the webinar today. So please jump in the chat if you have any questions, and they'll be able to help to field any kind of anything that I miss as I'm going through. And I appreciate everybody, again, letting us know where you're from. Looks like we've got a wide-ranging audience today. So I appreciate everybody, and we're going to jump right into it. So my name is Mike. I've been with BSD now for about 5.5 years. I came here, I put a couple bullets to kind of tell you my story here, because I think everybody's got kind of a unique story to technology education. But I started at Drexel University, where I got a master's in digital media, doing things like web design and animation and game development, learned a little bit of code, learned a little design, all sorts of these cool things. In a lot of ways, it was project-based learning because I was connecting all the other subjects in my school with the media that I was learning kind of in my main discipline. At that point, I really felt that teaching was important to me. I felt that was a way that I could, help close gaps in my community and here in Philadelphia, and how I could have the biggest impact is using my technical skills as well as kind of communication teaching skills. So I started teaching classes. I ended up sort of transitioning to teach teachers, which I think is a very common pathway that a lot of us take. When we want to look to multiply our impact potentially, right? It's like the more teachers I can teach, they all have students under them, and I can affect thousands of students, which really has become kind of a lifelong pursuit for me. Currently at BSD, I oversee professional development. So if you have any questions about PD or anything like that, I'm happy to get into it. Maybe not on today's webinar, but I'll make myself available. Now, BSD in general, what we are, we partner with schools in order to empower teachers to bring real world technology into every classroom. And I've imagined that many of you are maybe the tech person within your organization, and you know that this can be a big challenge with many barriers. And so we provide a partner that schools can rely on, that schools can help in making this process work. We do this with really 3 tools. One is our curriculum, fully scoped and sequenced, ready to go, plug and play. The second is our platform, which scaffolds learning and gives teachers real-time data on how their students are doing. And the third and most important, in my biased opinion, is the training and support. That's the relationships we build with each individual teacher and organization. So altogether, we are able to kind of make paradigm shifts happen within schools. Now, the last thing I'll say about us, because I think this is an important thing for us to kind of touch on, we're all here to learn about project-based learning today. So BSD does employ the use of projects heavily in our curriculum. And we really are aiming to build digital skills for all students. We know that not everyone's going to become a computer scientist. So what we're looking to do is design and develop curriculum that hits at that core fundamental digital literacy that everybody should have. And these include hard skills like coding and programming, as well as data analysis and content creation for the web. But also, when we think about project-based learning skills, we think about those soft skills as far as communication, collaboration, and getting kids thinking critically, which you'll see in just a moment is backed by research when it comes to project-based learning. And then finally is our values, and that's the lens with which this webinar was created, as well as everything that we do. We're really trying to instill a sense of curiosity, adaptability, resilience, and empathy. We call those our CARE values. And we find that no matter what happens in the future and how things develop and how careers and the economy and the world changes, those 4 attributes will serve our students into the future. All right, so with that said, enough of that. Let's talk a little bit about project-based learning. So like I said before, some of you may be involved in project-based learning right now or curious about implementing it in your school. The first thing that we want to do is kind of establish the why, the what and why of project-based learning, just that we're all on the same page for the next part when we talk about the how. So right off the bat, project-based learning is about giving students a reason to learn. It's about really answering that question of when am I ever going to use this? And you can do it in really creative and interesting ways, but they have to be based in reality. Now, these pictures that I've included here, this is actually an example of the output of a class that I co-taught several years ago. And I've cut off the students' heads here on purpose. I don't want to share anything out of kind of edit it, but I wanted you to see these projects because here's the setup. What we did is we knew that they had a big production, a musical that the students were going to put on. They each had a role to play, and their parents would all be there to see them perform. But we also knew that we wanted to dip into this idea of project-based learning and to involve multiple subjects from across the students' schedules, right? And get them kind of all the teachers contributing something that would be present in the play. And we decided to connect all these things through technology. So here's what happened. On the left-hand side, you see a playbill. Now, this was created using HTML and CSS code. They're 2 basic coding languages that allow you to produce websites. And this was actually created in collaboration with myself and with the students who helped design it. And what we did is we listed everybody who would be in the play in a playbill that could be accessed online. So the idea was that the parents, when they're there and they're waiting for the play to start, right, and they're all sitting around and everybody's got their playbills, instead we would have a giant link and a QR code up on the screen that the parents could scan. And when they scan it and click on each of their students, what they see there is a website made by them. And it's a website that has contributions from every one of their classes. So you can see their costumes that they created. You see that you've got Spanish translations that were relevant to the context of the play. They made sonnets because they were studying that in their language arts classes. They actually, in their art class, did these sort of foil press artwork that they put on there. And they also had another project from their technology class, an advertising poster that they linked on for the show. And so what happened was when the parents all show up for this play, we've solved a real problem. They're all waiting around, but instead we make this really awesome moment where we honor what the students have been working on. We showcase their work. All of the parents get to see all the awesome things that have been done at the school. And it was a huge hit. We had awesome analytics to show that it was used hundreds of times just on that night. So it really was a way of bringing things together, solving a real problem. And the best part is the deadline's not just something imposed by the teacher, right? The deadline is, hey, it's showtime, right? We gotta play. So this may not be an example that you'd be able to replicate at your school straight away, right? And that's not what today is about. Today is not about having you change the whole way everything works at your school. But what today is about is thinking about these questions when you're designing projects in class. You want to make sure that the learning is relevant, right? You want to bring it into something that's local. You want to look sometimes, if you can, at what's happening in the news. What current events could you be connecting and linking your own projects to, whether those are a play happening at school or what's happening overseas. And then you want to also figure out how it applies to life and does it solve a real problem? And do the kids really need these skills? Do they really need to know this information? And if we can start thinking about that as we design projects, and we can start following some of the other processes that you're going to see during this presentation, what we can do is we can take steps towards a paradigm shift and take steps into project-based learning and sort of prove as we go, because we know some of our schools perhaps are not as flexible as this particular organization was. Now, there's many, many more examples than this, but I think this is good for now. What I want to do is I want to push forward now and talk about the rigor and the research that goes into project-based learning. At this point, we know that project-based learning is not just a sort of a fad. It's not just some sort of alternate learning experience that is experimental. This is something that has been studied and taken right through the coals and analyzed from every angle at this point. So I'm going to go through a couple of the 5 main points of project-based learning, the benefits, the reasons why schools are starting to move into project-based learning, and the reasons why you should consider as well, including these projects in your class time. The first off is that studies have shown that project-based learning increases long-term retention of the content material, which is obviously an important thing that we want to do. We actually have a link that I'm going to share with you. Let me see if I can paste this in the chat at the same time here without everybody losing access. I'm going to paste this in for those of you who want to really get into the weeds and go through the material and see it for yourself that talks about that retention of content. Another thing that is going to be important to your school is that it helps students perform as well or better than traditional learners on high stakes tests. So one of the kind of adversaries to project-based learning is we have priorities that lead to these standardized tests. We really have to teach kids to the test, which most of us agree is not a great system, but it's sort of what we're given as a starting point. But project-based learning actually has shown to help students in that scenario as well. It probably is related to number 3, where we've been able to measure problem solving and collaboration skills improving. You're forced to deal with adversity when you're forced to work with people, when you're forced to do a project together. And being able to think like this and to shift your mental model to match what's actually happening is a crucial skill that we believe is worth pursuing for our students in the future when we're not sure what types of jobs they might be doing. Number 4 is important because not only does it improve students' attitudes towards learning, but it also has been shown to renew interest in learning, to take kind of like, oh, I have to go to school again, to like, okay, I'm going to school again. And that's something that I think after the year we've just had, we really, really could use something that could reinvigorate learning, that could get kids excited about coming in and help them boost attendance, help to close the learning gap from the previous year. And project-based learning has already been shown to be that thing. And finally, it provides an effective model for whole school reform. It's sort of how I opened today, talking about how this is a moment in time when schools are looking to be innovative, and project-based learning gives us a place to start. It gives us something to build off of. For sure, your school's project-based learning will look different than mine, but it gives us a common kind of methodology and definitions that we can start from. So there's lots of good reasons to do it. I implore you to check out the link posted. If you have any other questions or concerns, you can dive even deeper into that. So let's talk about one more important distinction before I move on to how we do this, which is I'm doing projects in class. Is that project-based learning? No, not exactly. There is a difference between doing projects and doing project-based learning. Project-based learning really is meant to be, it's a way of teaching, right? It is the whole methodology. We can't necessarily just do a project after the learning has happened in the traditional sense. So let me give you an example. Let's say that we're doing a kind of a typical science class, and we're going to study dinosaurs. We're going to study fossils, and we're going to understand kind of what they ate and how, all these different things, that kind of your classic, ancient world dinosaur lesson. And when we're done learning from that by doing the readings and watching the video material and such, at the end, we create a diorama. And we have our little figurines, and we use our materials, and we use everything we learned to create this project. Now, a lot of folks think that that's project-based learning because we have an artifact at the end. And while that can be helpful, we've actually missed something by doing all of the learning outside of the project and then bringing the project in at the end. What we're really looking to do is to have this paradigm shift in the way we think about teaching. That's what project-based learning is. Project-based learning is making sure that the project we're building has a meaningful reason to make us learn, right? If you remember what we talked about here, the reason for these students to build all of these different various components was for the play, right? We all had this kind of question that we were chasing after. We all had this kind of end product that we were excited about, and everything led into this. We don't want to necessarily have a traditional classroom environment kind of plus a project at the end. That's not quite the same thing. So if that's not the same thing, how can I do more? Well, first off, there's a lot more that we could talk about with project-based learning, and BSD actually does offer professional development, and we do talk about these things in our trainings. But right now we're gonna move on because we have very limited time together, and we're gonna talk now about how do I design my lesson, right? How do I plan this out based on the standards that I'm given? How do I then go and create a project-based learning experience? So to do this, we're going to start with some example standards. These were just pulled from the American Curriculum Standards. They're sort of generic, but by design. I know that there may be people attending here from kindergarten all the way up through high school. So I want to be conscious of that. We kind of picked middle of the road standards that you'll be kind of familiar with and will sound, will seem relevant to the standards that you use at your school. So what you'll notice here is we've got a sixth grade project, clearly 3 sixth grade standards, but across 3 different subjects, right? Social studies, we're looking for students to analyze the geographic, political, economic, religious, and social structures of early civilizations, such as Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians. Then in writing, we're looking at using narrative writing techniques, such as dialogue, pacing, and description to develop experiences, events, and/or characters. I'm moving a couple of Zoom tabs around while I talk, so pardon if there's a little delay. And then finally at the bottom, in science, we're looking to describe how plate tectonics cause major geological events such as ocean basin formation, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and mountain building. Now, at the surface level, these are clearly 3 separate projects, right? These are 3 separate goals that we're trying to achieve. But understanding how they fit together is part of the art of project-based learning. And it's also part of the fun too. The whole appeal of project-based learning, for me, at least as an educator, is that I have the creativity to find the connection between these things and to create the narrative that I want to use to deliver them to the students. So for this example, we're going to give you sort of a sample of what this could turn into as a project-based learning prompt. So first off, and again, I apologize, I'm moving some windows around here. First off, we're going to start with a driving question. Now, this driving question is the question that you would write on the board. This is the question that would stay up for the entire year or for the entire length of the project for us to always look back to and always be trying to answer. This is the main goal. And in this case, our driving question is, how have modern and ancient societies benefited from the natural resources around them and failed because of natural disaster? And the wonderful thing about a driving question is that you can't Google it, right? I mean, they're so hard to create assignments now that kids can't just plug into some kind of calculator somewhere and get the answer, but you can't Google a driving question. It's not a yes or no. You need to learn about all the different aspects that are already in our standards in order to come together and create a cohesive response to a question like this. You need to learn a lot of stuff, and that's what we want. So what we do after the driving question is we define a specific project. Okay, so what is the project description? So the Minoan earthquake in 16 BC was one of the largest disasters ever. How did the Greek people recover from it, and what caused the earthquake? How have other societies planned for natural disasters since? So you can see this one single thought process is sort of dancing around all 3 of our standards. And where it gets really fun is in the project deliverables. So this is not voice and choice yet. This is not options. All students will complete all 3 of these deliverables. And the first deliverable is a dramatized first-person account of the Minoan earthquake. The second is a presentation of what civilizations have done to be safe from natural disaster. And the third is a model depicting how plate tectonics work. Now, I want to point out 3 things for these different points, these different deliverables that were chosen. The first is that I need my students to write something, right? And I can't get away from that. Here in the standards, it said use narrative writing techniques. So in order to be rigorous, in order to make sure that I'm meeting the standards that are required of me, I have to have the students write something. So project-based learning does not mean no more book reports, no more writing, no more following the standards. Not at all. We still need to make sure that we adhere to what we originally committed to. But it's just going to be in the context of a larger project here. Now, the second piece, you'll notice presentation is in quotation marks. That's because I want there to be a little wiggle room. I want presentation to possibly mean some different things to different people. Some may do a PowerPoint, and that's okay, but somebody may want to do a dance, and somebody may want to record a podcast. And there may be other skills that my students have that would help them to engage with the material and would be something that they'd be proud to stay up working on, to work on over the weekend, to share with their friends because they did such a good job. So I do want to leave a little bit of wiggle room there for students to kind of help me to differentiate, help me, differentiate. But they kind of automate that for me, which we'll talk about more in just a moment. And you'll notice the same thing for model too, because again, some people may make this model with clay, but other people may want to use a 3D printer, and some other people may want to use 3D modeling software like a CAD or something, which is fine. And I think that's an important part of what project-based learning opens up to us and makes exciting for the kids. When we talk about that renewed interest for school, it's because they feel like they have a place to participate and contribute into the experience. And that's only going to become more as we go through. I got some really good stuff for you in the next couple slides. So we're going to try this together. We're going to try to put you in the hot seat a little bit, and no pressure. We're just going to have some fun with it. We're going to try to develop a project idea based on this model. And we're going to use 3 standards that are separate this time. These are actually not going to be the same as last time, so I'll read through them quickly. And then I'm going to show you how we can collaborate in order to come up with right here, our driving question, project description, and deliverables. So first off, it comes from social studies, and we want to explain the ways in which complex societies interact and spread from one region to another, like trade, cultural or linguistic exchanges, migration, religious conversion, conquest, or colonization. The second one, in writing, we want to introduce a topic, organize ideas, concepts, and information using strategies such as definition, classification, comparison, contrast, and cause and effect. And then finally, in science, describe a biotic and abiotic parts of an ecosystem in which organisms interact. For those of you who are maybe not science teachers or are far from the 6th grade science classroom, biotic and abiotic just mean living and non-living parts of an ecosystem. Living and non-living, that's biotic and abiotic. So now what we're going to do is we're going to flip it over to you a little bit. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to grab my second link, which should be right here. Go ahead and copy. This is a tool called Jamboard, and I hope that some people have used this before. Jamboard's a really cool tool. I'm going to label it here so everybody can see it. Jamboard. And Jamboard is a tool that we can use to collaborate either virtually or in person. Really, it works too. One of the great things is that it actually is kind of a software that replicates real life. So if we're in the classroom, we can actually just use things like sticky notes and dry erase boards. We don't actually need to use the technology here. But because we're all in separate places, I've decided to instead share this Jamboard with you. Now I've switched over tabs, so hopefully you can see my Jamboard, and you'll notice a couple things about it. First of all, if you've never used this before, on the left-hand side are all of your tools. So you have over here markers and erasers, you've got your move tool, but you've also got like sticky notes. I love the sticky notes. I think that like anytime I've ever seen anybody use this, they're all making sticky notes. So you can just click on it, write whatever you want on your sticky note, whatever you want. And then when you save it, you have this kind of physical sticky note that you can move around and even tilt if you wish. I don't know why they added that. I guess just because they want you to have full control. So, and then of course you can delete that, but we can all edit this now freely. Now, of course, there's some rules. Page 1 is the example of the standards that we used before. So that's my example. That's not yours. Page 2, I'm up at the top now using the pagination up here. Page 2 is the driving question that we created, again, as an example. And then page 3 is where the project starts. Page 3 through 15 are all copies of each of the same board. So these are your 3 standards, and these are your 3 areas, your driving question, description, and deliverable. So what would be awesome is if folks could sort of claim either board number 3 through 15 and try this out. So you can claim it just by going like this and say, Mike's board. And then now it's mine, right? Just like that. And then you can add some of your own thoughts here, either as text boxes or sticky notes or whatever you want. And I would love for you to come up with a driving question, a description, and a deliverable. That said, because I sort of hate the silence while we all wait, especially since we're all here to contribute to this webinar together, and not everybody's going to be in front of a computer situation where they can do this. I do have a couple more things that I'd like to share sort of while people are working or listening, if they're listening. So let me go ahead and add a few things. One thing we hear a lot when we do coaching around project-based learning is, I am a science teacher, or I am an English teacher, or I am a history teacher, and why would I spend my effort to include all these other subjects, right? That's something that we hear a lot. It's just like, what's in it for me? But actually the research is behind this. The research says that students actually get a much better experience when they can see the connection between the subjects. One of the kind of things that we fall into, the patterns that we fall into here in our traditional education system, tends to be that subjects are segregated, and it's sort of like, oh, I'm not a math person, or oh, I'm not a good artist, or I'm not this, or I'm not that. But the real world isn't like that, is it? I mean, the real world, everything's connected, and in order to develop the next iPhone, you have to be a technologist and an artist. That's just how it worked. And so we really want to kind of break down those barriers where we can, and help to understand that there's added benefit all around if we can collaborate. One of the biggest measurements for the success of project-based learning within an organization is collaboration, buy-in across subjects. And that requires flexibility. So things like in terms of how you schedule and how you share resources, and all of those different things requires give and take across your team, which can be tough. And that's why oftentimes you start by doing a project-based learning course just for yourself, which is totally fine and totally possible. You can say, just within the realm of science, create a compelling project-based learning course and program of learning, and you do not have to, let's say, collaborate with everybody in your school in your first shot. It can be something where you try it out, and then other people will peek over the fence and say, wow, look at that class, it's awesome. They've decorated the whole thing like the Amazon rainforest. How do I get in on this? And then it can grow organically that way. All right, I'm going to click around and just see if we've got some people doing some activity. Cool, cool, cool. We got some people claiming boards here. Awesome. And you can add a few different ways here, and you can just do this in real time. I know I'm talking, so it may be hard to concentrate. But if you've got one like this, you can just go ahead and either click right here. Oops, let's click on the text first, a sticky note, and put your driving question right in there. This is my driving question. And then it can like sit right here. 1, 2, 3, just in a row. Also, the text box is great for this. We can click the text box and just say, how does this work? And put your description that way. All right, anybody else? I've got a couple more notes to add. It looks like people have claimed it. Hopefully you come back and try it. You know, if you don't have the time now to put it in, hopefully you come back and give it a shot. Oh, now we got 16 pages. That's cool. I don't know what happened with page 16. All right. So let me just add one more thing before we move on from the example here, which is that it's possible that you're looking at this and you're saying, this is a lot of work. And that's okay. And that is a kind of part of it. But what I want you to be thinking about right now is what you can bring to the table for project-based learning. So it may be that you have skills in video editing. It may be that you speak another language. It may be that you're an excellent chef. Whatever it may be, I want you to think about what is it that you love to do, that you're engaged with, and how maybe could that be attached to standards that you're required to teach to. It could also be who's in your network. And this could be people at your school, but it could also be people in your community. I'm going to give you an example of a project-based learning course that we do at BSD, and it involves the community. And that's another really great way to think about project-based learning is how can I make it real world by getting out people from outside of the school into the learning experience. So anybody that wants to share in particular, I'm going to see if I can catch anybody who's done a little bit more. A few things here. Cool. And I have the make a model thing. I like that. Maybe throw some quotes on there too and give them some room. All right, awesome. We're going to move on. I do have another activity, but I've actually, for this activity, I've sort of pre-done it. So we're just going to go through it together for the sake of time. So perfect. Let's look through an example together. This is going to be the last one, and then I want to talk about one of the most crucial, one of the most important, one of the most awesome parts of project-based learning on the next slide. So for this one in particular, this is an example project that we have delivered to students. right? So the prompt is this: design a 30-second public service announcement that needs to be a film. This is a video that they're making for Cambodian children about the benefits of eating a plant-based diet as access to high-quality beef, pork, and chicken decline. All right, so we've kind of set up this thing it's got a few different elements to it, doesn't it? It has health education. They're going to need to understand about nutrition and what's required from the body, but it also has to do with social studies and also what agriculture is available to Cambodian children. And it also has a component of digital media where we need to do some film recording and things like that. So typically what we'll do is when we first share a project with our students, we'll gather everybody up. Here's your prompt. We're going to give them the description and help them understand a little bit about what is being asked of them, just like this slide here. Then we're going to give them the timeline, right? The duration of the project, and say, here's when it needs to be done by. And we'll also give them the resources. You'll be able to use, for instance, the computer lab. You'll have access to such and such a mentor's time or whatever it may be that they have that they can lean on. And then we go to the most important piece of project-based learning. This is the paradigm shift. This is where we're able to, with a little maybe psychological trickery, but also kind of just clever planning, we're able to flip the classroom and engage the students. And it goes like this. We ask them the question, what do we know already? And what do we need to know? And this is huge. This is the most important thing. Normally, the way school works is that we tell them what they learn. Today in class, we'll be learning about trapezoids, right? You're going to just tell them, this is what we're doing today. But this activity flips that. Now, before we go into exactly what's happening here in the two columns, just know that we're not saying the kids are in control. We're not saying that kids run the school and plan the lessons. Behind the scenes, you've already got all your material made. You've got your textbooks, so you don't have to get rid of those. You've got your video resources. Maybe you've recorded your own. You've got all your teaching materials. That stays the same. What changes is that the students are going to be the ones who take ownership of this, and the students are going to be the one that identify what we need to learn here. So let's start with the basic layout I have here. I created sort of a T. I put this on a Jamboard, obviously. You can see that it's got the same style of sticky notes as before, but you could do this on a dry erase board or whatever you want. When I used to do this before BSD, what we would do is we would actually write this out on the board, and then we'd keep it up for the duration of the project. And then we'd move stuff from the what do I need to learn column into the what we know column. So you almost use it like a Scrum board, if you're familiar with in the world of development, where like all your tasks are getting moved into the things you know column. It's a really great visual to kind of see our progress. So we start, of course, on the left-hand side with what do we already know. Now, all of these cards have been filled out by real students. These were their answers. We need to use this opportunity to figure out where we're at, right? To kind of take a temperature of the class. So we see students who have written, I know how to edit videos. I've visited Cambodia, this whole typo. I know that people need protein, right? That's kind of a funny one. But it's interesting because we didn't mention protein in the prompt, but this student is identifying that, well, if they can't get meat, maybe they need protein, but I don't know what that means or what's involved. And then my sister is vegan, which can be interesting too. And what's great about this is not only is this the opportunity to honor what they know and their experiences, but also we are tagging students right now mentally. We're saying, okay, this is my co-conspirator when we get to video editing. This is the person who's going to share to the class about Cambodia. We're actually being able to identify where students are, and it actually forms this really natural differentiation that we're going to talk about in just a moment. So that can be really great. And then on the right side is even better, because what's happening is that we were already going to hit these topics, but now they came from their mouths and not ours. So what do we need to learn in order to do this project? Well, how about types of plant-based food? How about what are the current diets of Cambodian children? What about Cambodian tradition, right? What kind of meals do they eat? What are they used to? How do they eat? What do they use? Utensils? How is it different than ours? We need to learn about making an attractive video, right? Because we need to get their buy-in. And we need to understand the benefits of eating a plant-based diet to children's health, or maybe there's disadvantages too, of course. We might need to learn some software. We might need to understand about the price and availability of food so that when we create these menus, if that's what we're doing, then they'll have access to those things. And then agriculture and natural resources. You look at all this, it's great. I mean, the students are basically looking at these from different angles, and they're telling themselves what they're going to need to learn. And this is huge to have that type of buy-in over time. So during the course of your class, this becomes the guiding light. Now, I've mentioned the word differentiation a couple of times, and that's because project-based learning lends itself really well to differentiation. Like I mentioned, you're going to be able to use the same lessons that you've already developed in the past, because they need to learn the same types of things. But the way that you can deliver them can be more flexible than before. So bear with me here, because for some of you, this may seem a little extreme, but this is how the most effective project-based learning courses are running in BSD's experience right now. What they'll say is they'll use the board and figure out who knows what, and kind of what percentage of their class is familiar with what, and what we really need to focus on. And then instead of having a lesson that's at the same time every day, we can flip the classroom. We can maybe provide our resources for those that don't know, and they can look at it on their own time. Or we could say, today's lesson is I'm going to be going over iMovie, and we're going to be talking about the video editing capabilities and what you need for this project. But if you already know this, then you can work on something else. You can be working on a different aspect of your project. And by actually allowing the kids to sort of elect into these by saying, oh, I want to attend that workshop, I haven't done that before, or I want to read these resources because this is my responsibility for my team's project. What you're doing is you're filtering kids into the buckets that they themselves are putting themselves into based on their need and based on solving the end project, rather than the way we do it now, which is that everybody is meant to learn the same thing at the same speed at the same time. Obviously, there's a lot to digest here, and so this is something that can be a challenge at first, but it really is something that can change the way that you think about delivering education. I think that's it on what I want to say about that. I want to push this forward. I'm conscious of time here. I also haven't seen anything in the chat, but if you do have any questions or any comments, please feel free to light it up. So let's kind of reflect real quick. Questions to ask ourselves is, how can I be providing voice and choice for my students? Again, this doesn't mean that students run the school. This means that how can I help them to self-identify what their skills are, what their interests are, and connect that to the material in a meaningful way. Number two is, how can I differentiate? And this leads into kind of maybe opening up my schedule a little bit to be more flexible, and maybe saying, well, maybe not every student needs to be in this one, or maybe a few students in our class really need to do this extra homework that not everybody else does. And I think you'll find that that's going to kind of fall into place with PBL. And then the third is, where do I need help? And of course, this goes to this applies to everybody. Teachers need help, right? We all need help. So we need to understand who's in our network that's going to support me. Where does my administration stand on this? What other teachers could I recruit as allies? But also, what other students can I use in my class? Remember before, some of these students had examples of, I know how to edit videos, for instance. Well, maybe this student is running that course, right? Maybe this student becomes the head creative director for the project. Maybe that student is tutoring a small group of students who are learning to edit videos. So in terms of how can I use help, is like, what resources do I have within my school, within my classroom, within my community to help me achieve this project? All right, and then finally, we want to show you a sample project. So this is actually a real project that we have within our Tech Ready curriculum. BSD's Tech Ready curriculum is sort of our flagship technology course. And this particular project is called the multi-page website. In it, students create a multi-page website, right? They use HTML and CSS code in order to create a web page that can be about virtually anything. However, the way we've designed this particular project is that they're meant to connect with somebody in their community who really needs a website. A lot of students will choose their friend's band or their local skate park, or their, they'll find something that is not represented currently online. Others have family who are in business who could really use a website. We've actually had other people do for language translations of existing sites. So there's all sorts of ways that students can connect with people out there. However, our curriculum also understands that that's not always going to be possible. So we do offer the option as well to use a fictitious website. But the whole advantage here, and what makes it real, of course, is we connect to the community. We bring in a third party who now has some say in this, right? And they have to kind of be project managed and get approval from their clients and all these awesome real world things. But we also have now teams of students who are working on a long-term project that will then be released out into the wild, that then will be something that has this really natural outcome. We don't have to ask that question of when am I ever going to use this, because you're using it right now. Like there is no difference between learning and building something. All right, so that's one example on BSD Online. There's many others that we could chat about, but I thought this was a nice one that kind of you could picture yourself in. I want to wrap up. I know that there's not going to be a ton of time for questions, but I do want to say that everybody for attending this webinar does actually have access to take the next step if you'd like to. We will offer a course called Code is Your Voice that includes 8 projects. That does include coding, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It's completely scaffolded. So if you've never coded before, you will be able to try this. You can go ahead and use the URL right there, BSD Education /webinar trial. That's something that'll bring you right to it, or the QR code. You'll also see that in the follow-up email that we send with the recording of this webinar. So definitely check this out. This is going to be a fall/winter 2021 thing. If you have any questions, we've linked Brent here, who has all the answers. I do have a slide here that has some of the projects, but I'm not going to go too deep into any of them because I really would love to hear if anybody has any questions or feedback. If you don't feel like speaking up on the webinar, on the chat right now, please leave us your feedback here in the feedback link, which I'm actually also going to type into the down here at the bottom. Spell that right. All right. So with that said, are there any questions? Could we end with a question? Is there anybody who's tried project-based learning and had success? Maybe you want to paste something in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself. Maybe just a moment. I'll take a nice long sip of my water. No, awesome. All right, cool. Well, I really appreciate. Oh wait, I got some. How do you assess PBL when there are other assessment criteria that my school follows? Yeah, no, great question. Obviously, we want to make sure that this is going to be something that we can actually assess. So there's a couple of methods that we can use for this. One that we use here at BSD is something called a single point rubric. So there's like, you're familiar with like a standard, like maybe 5-point rubric. If you did a 1, you did this. If you did a 5, you do this. And the problem with that was that we were constricting students within a box. You could only do so bad and you can only do so good, especially the so good part. We want to make sure that it's more open-ended than that. So a single point rubric actually allows you to kind of start everybody at a 3, but then assess what they did in terms of that was above and beyond, and what they did that could use improvement. And in terms of formative assessment, that's a great way. Once you have to add a number and a letter to it, that presents its own challenge with PBL, right? Because the whole idea of sort of labeling a certain student early on as a C or a B or an A student can sort of have negative effects all the way through the spectrum, whether they think they're an A and they can only get A's now, or whether they think they're a D and they can't achieve this. So BSD in particular really focuses on formative assessment, not as something that's punitive or labeling, but more of something that is providing useful feedback that you can actually use to improve your work and yourself. So we definitely emphasize like portfolios and presentations. And of course, we understand that administration needs to have some way of tracking things, but the way that you kind of normalize that and transition your formative assessment, kind of written formative assessment into a grade number, that's going to be different for every single school, even within a district. Yeah. Any last questions? If you'd like, please follow up via email. We'd love to connect with everybody. I'm conscious of time here. We're right at the last mid of the time you've committed to us. I really appreciate each and every one of you joining. And thanks so much for your presentation, for your attention and your participation. Take care, everybody. Hope you have an awesome rest of your day and a great week.